Hi, everybody. Brad Truax here from Eastman's Woodlands and Wildlife Committee. And today we're going to continue our series on birds that you might see at Eastman. And today we're going to talk about the Northern Cardinal. The Northern Cardinal is easily one of the most recognizable birds in your backyard, mainly because of its brilliant color. And they're so popular that they're actually the state bird of multiple states, mascot of multiple athletic teams, and often featured in postcards or Christmas cards and so on. And the bright red color of the male cardinal really stands out against the background in every season. And that bright red color is actually good for attracting a mate, but unfortunately, it also makes them visible to potential predators. The female is a duller olive color with some reddish tinges on the tail, the wings, and the crest. And cardinals are mid-sized songbirds. They're typically about 8 to 9 inches long and weigh between 1 and 2 ounces. So they're a little bit bigger than some of the other songbirds that you might see around your bird feeder. And they all have a prominent red crest atop the head, and they have rather large red bills. And both the male and female have a black mask on the face and the throat area, but this is a little bit less prominent in the female. And again, they're common in the eastern half of the United States, in southern Canada, and also in Mexico. And they're resident birds. They don't migrate. So you'll see them just as often in the winter as you will other times of the year. Uh, for most bird species, the male is usually much more colorful than the female. The female tends to have a duller color. And the cardinals are a classic example of this. This is called sexual dimorphism. Again, a difference in appearance between the males and the females. And the male here on the right is bright red, whereas the female here on the left is kind of a duller brownish or olive color. Well, the bright red for the male actually is helpful in attracting a mate. On the other hand, the duller color of the female actually provides her with some camouflage when she's sitting on the nest. So the color difference between the male and the female is also of some functional significance. So what's with the crest? Well, if you remember our presentation on blue jays, the status of the crest basically tells you what their mood is like. So the same thing applies to the cardinal. So here at the top, where there's a raised crest, that indicates that the cardinal is alert or excited or aggressive. And then on the bottom, when the crest is down, the cardinal is calm, relaxed, or resting. Interestingly, here, we'll talk about this later, looks like this male cardinal is feeding a female cardinal, and that's often part of the mating ritual. We'll talk about that later on. So here's the facial mask. Again, they have this prominent black mask that's on their face and their throat. There it is in the male. It's a little less prominent down here in the female. No, this cardinal is not sick. In late summer or early fall, the northern cardinals actually molt their feathers. And for some reason, the head feathers molt most rapidly. It leaves the bird almost appearing to be bald. So this looks like a very sickly bird, but in fact, it's a very healthy bird. It's just seen during the molt. And the new feathers are usually going to grow back in about a week or so. So in wintertime, the bright red of the cardinal contrasts brilliantly against the snow. And they'll also puff up their feathers to provide some insulation. So they appear much plumper typically in winter. So you see that down here. And they'll often flock together in winter with other cardinals or even with some other birds. Now, once again, when spring arrives and the breeding season is there, that flock will rapidly break apart, and each cardinal becomes very territorial. So where do they live? Well, we mentioned, the whole eastern half of the United States, part of southern Canada, and parts of Mexico. And they like to live in woodlands or forest edges. shrublands or wetlands. They really don't like open fields, so they need some dense vegetation to provide them with some safety and some good nesting areas. So again, they tend to avoid those open fields, but they actually do like suburbs and gardens as well. So what do cardinals eat? Well, they eat mostly seeds, grains, fruits, and berries. And in fact, the red color of the cardinal actually depends on their diet. It depends on the amount of carotenoids in the diet, and those usually come from fruits and berries. So the redder a male cardinal is, the more likely he is to be perceived as healthy and attractive to a mate. Very interesting. But they'll also eat some insects and snails, and they may even drink the sap from some of the wells drilled by sapsuckers in trees. If you remember, you may want to go back to our presentation on woodpeckers, but the yellow-bellied sapsucker drills these little holes that are called wells in the trees, often in birch trees, and a little bit of sap will drip out of those holes, and a number of birds, including the cardinals, will often drink some of that sap. And cardinals mainly forage on the ground, but they also love your bird feeders. But the hatchlings eat something different. They'll be fed caterpillars, beetles, spiders, and other insects that have a very high protein and lipid content. And that's because that provides growth. In some of our other presentations, we've talked about the real importance of caterpillars for fledgling birds. There are caterpillars almost everywhere in the spring. Sometimes you can't see them, but the adult birds will find them, bring them back, and feed the hatchlings. They're actually far and away the most important source of nutrition for hatchlings, not just of the cardinals, but in fact of most birds. So, what do cardinals eat? Well, if you want more cardinals at your bird feeder, try safflower seeds. Turns out that the cardinals love safflower seeds, and squirrels and other birds don't like them quite as much. But if you're also trying to attract them, keep in mind that because they're a little bit bigger than most songbirds, you probably need some larger perches on your bird feeders if you're going to allow the cardinals to be there. So again, cardinals are monogamous and they often mate for life. However, sometimes the males and the females cheat on their partner. And this actually leads to some genetic mixing, which probably results in greater diversity. Actually, about 20% of the pairs actually split up by the next breeding season as well. And the breeding season is in the spring, and the males will protect a territory that's usually about 3 acres in size. And the females will choose a male based on two things: the richness of his color, basically how brilliant the red color is, and also how aggressive he is in defending that territory. So, again, the territory is about 3 acres in size, and how well he defends that territory is one of the things the female will consider in choosing him as a potential mate. And again, as I mentioned before, the males continue that mating ritual by feeding seeds or insects to the female beak to beak. And that's basically showing the female that he's going to be a good provider. So again, in terms of the nesting, the female cardinal actually builds the nest pretty much by herself, and the nests are usually cup-shaped. They're located in dense brush or low trees, and they're made up of twigs, bark, grasses, plant fibers, and sometimes lined with pine needles. And the nests usually are not reused. They'll usually build a new nest each year. And the female will lay 3 to 4 eggs, sometimes maybe two to as many as 5 or more. And the eggs are usually white with kind of green, blue, or brown speckles. And the female does most of the incubation. But one interesting thing is they actually have 2 to 4 clutches per year. It never dawned on me that a bird like the cardinal would have more than one clutch in a year. Typically, they have at least two, and sometimes as many as 4 clutches per year. And the male will end up feeding the hatchlings while the female is incubating the next clutch of eggs. The hatchlings usually leave the nest after 9 to 11 days, but they usually can't fly very well until about day 19. And the male will continue to protect the young for 2 to 8 weeks, even after they're able to fly. And that male will teach them how to forage and basically how to communicate with the other cardinals. And the young usually are able to breed on their own by the next spring. So, in terms of vocalizations, the Northern Cardinals have a wide variety of vocalizations. They're said to have up to 16 distinct calls and songs. And some are mating calls, others are warning calls, and some are simply ways of communicating with their own family. So, if you want to hear some of those songs and calls, go to click on this link to the Audubon.org organization, and you'll be able to hear some of their songs and calls. So, do the Cardinals have any predators? Well, they do. Large raptors like owls, falcons, hawks, and eagles, and domestic cats are the primary predators of the cardinal. The chickens and the eggs in the nest also can be preyed upon by snakes, blue jays, crows and ravens, squirrels, chipmunks, fox, and domestic cats. And frequently, particularly in the suburban areas, domestic cats are actually probably the biggest threat. So, how long do cardinals live? A typical cardinal lives about 3 years in the wild, but some have been known to live as long as 13 to 15 years. And here are three fun facts about cardinals. First one is that the cardinal was actually named after cardinals of the Roman Catholic Church. The early colonists thought that the birds resembled those cardinals. Fun fact number two is that the cardinals are often seen fighting their reflections in mirrors or windows. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. And that usually happens during the breeding season, and it's the males mistaking their own reflection for an intruding male. And fun fact number three is that a cardinal may rarely be pure yellow rather than red, and that's due to a genetic mutation. So, in fact, here's that genetic mutation. This is a Northern Cardinal, but instead of being red, it's actually yellow where all the red used to be. And that's because of a pretty rare genetic mutation that actually stops them from metabolizing the yellow pigments into red. Okay, once again, the cardinal is actually named after cardinals in the Roman Catholic Church. And that's because the early colonists in America thought that these birds resembled the cardinals who wear red robes and have pointed hats. Interesting. And then here's you see a male cardinal here who's fighting with his reflection in the side view mirror of a car. So during breeding season, those male cardinals may attack mirrors or windows, and apparently they perceive their own reflected image as a intruding male. So again, this happens during breeding season, and they may continue to do this for a couple of weeks. So some people have complained that the cardinals actually attack the windows in their house. So some people have had to put up decals or other things to get them to stop doing that. So that's a little bit about cardinals. You're very likely to see cardinals here at your bird feeders at Eastman. Remember, we don't put our bird feeders out when bears are out there. So our bird feeders are out mainly in the winter. And particularly in the winter, the red of the male cardinal really stands out. So they're pretty easy to see. So again, that's a bit about cardinals. Hope you'll see one soon.